chapter 5. If you want to look down, starting in verse 1, we'll just jump right in. It says this: on one occasion, while the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, and he saw two boats by the lake, but the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. Getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, he asked him to put out a little from the land, and he sat down and taught the people from the boat. Jesus' ministry is just beginning at this point in time, and it was rapidly growing. It was exploding, and we see that people were pressing into Jesus to hear the word. Crowds were trying to follow Jesus everywhere that he was going. He would keep trying to escape. He'd go out into the wilderness. He'd pray. He'd come back. There'd be a crowd literally everywhere that he wanted to go. Paparazzi vibes, hardcore right there. So Jesus sees how many people there are like on this lake who want to hear the word, and Jesus realizes he's not going to be able to communicate in a way that all of these people will be able to hear. They didn't have like microphones and stuff like this back in this day. And so Jesus needed help actually to get the word out. And Jesus decides he was going to ask this man Simon to use his boat to go out to the sea. Now, the interesting thing about this is Jesus is God, right? Like Jesus can do anything. Jesus could have made a boat of his own, like a fat yacht, appear out of thin air and like cruise out and then preach from there. Jesus could have invented a megaphone on the spot and like bullhorned it from the shore, but he didn't do that. Instead, Jesus actually invites Peter to say, hey, Peter, you take me out to sea. I want to use your boat so that my voice can go and echo across the water and that everybody will be able to hear the gospel. And I love this because Jesus doesn't need us, but Jesus loves to invite us to participate in the work that he's doing. And that's what he's doing here with Peter, Simon Peter. He's giving him an opportunity to use what God has already given Simon to be used for God's glory and for God's kingdom. And so Jesus gets into the boat of this guy by the name of Simon Peter, who he recently just met. He had just recently called Simon Peter to be one of his disciples. And Peter had been out fishing all night long. And so this would be one of the last things, it says that he was already at the shore washing his nets. One of the last things you want to do after an all-night fishing excursion is go take some dude you just met out on a boat and like listen to him teach a sermon, right? I don't know if you've ever done like an all night like prayer and worship thing or something. The last thing you want to do in the morning is like sit through an hour teaching, right? But this is what's going on here. So Peter's like, I'm not really sure, but despite his tiredness, it's so cool. Peter takes Jesus out on the boat. Jesus sits down on the boat and he begins teaching. Jesus begins fishing for men. He begins proclaiming the good news. What I see in this that I just wanted to point out and remind us of and challenges us of is that there will always be obstacles and there will always be excuses that you can make in the way of serving Jesus. Serving Jesus is never convenient. It never comes at a convenient time. It never comes just at the right moment. It usually always comes at a very inconvenient moment. Being used by Jesus requires the willingness to sacrifice, the willingness to be inconvenienced like Peter was. And so if you've been waiting, saying, God, like I want to be used. I want you to use me, use my life, use my boat, use my house, use my relationships, use what I have. If you've been waiting for a convenient time for that to happen and you're wondering, why isn't it happening? It's because it never will. If you wait for just the right moment to say, God, now I'm ready for you to use me, that moment will never happen. And this is something that we have to be aware of, especially in our culture today. Our culture is plagued with busyness. Busyness is what I would call the golden calf of our generation. And in fact, it's something that's even celebrated. Like in our day and age, the more busy a person is, the more that we ascribe significance and value and worth to their life. This is what we do. Like it's something that we actually worship. Hey bro, do you want to, go to church with me? Oh, can't, too busy. Hey, do you want to go to my small group? Hey, can't, too busy. Hey, do you want to go and be a part of CEF and go serve in this cool kids ministry and get to prepare the gospel and share things? Oh, can't, too busy. We're all too busy, right? Jesus was too busy, and yet he wasn't. Yet he made time for people. He made time to do ministry. And so I just want to remind us, again, this is especially in our culture, so important to understand that being used by God is always going to require sacrifice. It's never going to come at a convenient time. You're never going to have a season where the busyness just slows down and you're like, whoa, I got like 50 free hours a week that I can just do whatever. That's not a reality for most people, except some of you millennials who are still living off the free handouts of the government and the COVID payout. Go get a job, please. That's for another sermon, but please, I'm not going to preach on that right now because it's for another time. I'm just saying. But again, like when did the goal of life become busyness? Since when did we celebrate like being too busy for people and too busy for ministry? too busy to be used by God in the things that he has for us. And so if that's you, if you're in a season where you're like, man, I would want to be used by God. Like Peter, working all night though. I've been up all night. I got to go to sleep. I've been grinding. If you're in a season where you're like, man, I want to be used by God, but I feel like I'm too busy, and I can't do that, you may have gotten a little bit off track, and I just want to encourage you to create space in your week, create margin in your week to allow Jesus to come and interrupt your normal schedule. Allow him to prepare you. Allow him to propose to you opportunities that he wants to use you, because it's in everyday normal life that he wants to do that. It's not like you got to go start some ministry or something. It's in everyday life that Jesus wants to use us. And the interruptions oftentimes come at moments when we never expect it. And so just be prepared, even this week. Say, God, like I invite you to interrupt my schedule. I invite you to break into the busyness and to ask me to use the boat even though I've been grinding and fishing all night and I'm super tired and I don't really want to do that. Would you break into our schedules and allow us to be used for your kingdom? So this is what happens. Simon was fishing all night. Jesus says, hey, I want to use your boat. And Peter takes him up on the opportunity and says, I'm willing to do that. Now, look what happens in verse 4 and 5. It says this, and when he had finished speaking, so he preaches this whole sermon, he said to Simon, put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch. And Simon answered, Master, we toiled all night and took nothing, but at your word, I will let down the nets. So Jesus here begins Peter's discipleship journey, not by calling him away from his profession, but rather by challenging him to expand his practice of it. Peter was a fisherman by trade. He had been out fishing all night. And in this moment, Jesus says, hey, it doesn't look like you caught anything fishing all night. I've got something new for you. We're going to try something new. I want you to go out into the deep waters, and I want you to let down your nets in the deep. Now, this, by the way, goes against everything that a fisherman knows. I'm not sure how many of y'all are fishermen by trade. It's not really a common trade nowadays, unless you're like the master and slaying massive bass and whatnot. But most of us don't do that. The deep, though, was not a place that fishermen normally went. The place that fishermen would fish on the Sea of Galilee was by the banks and by the shore, because that's typically where all the fish hung out. Also, it's now daytime when Jesus is saying, hey, we're going to go out and fish, and fishermen typically fished at night. And so again, both of these things go out into the deep, and it's the middle of the day. I've just preached a whole sermon. Both of these things went against everything that Peter knew about fishing, and this was his trade. This was his career. This was what he knew. So I want you to think about this. Here's this carpenter. That's what Jesus did for 30 years. He was a carpenter, a dude who works with wood, who now is this itinerant preacher starting a new ministry, and he's telling the fishermen how to do his job. Isn't that interesting? Some of you know what I'm talking about here. Don't you hate when people how to tell you how to do your job when they've never done it before? I talk with Storm and Jake from Forge all the time. People come in with all these ideas of what we should do. I tell them, go start your own coffee shop, right? People do that in the church all the time. Hey, here's all these things you should do. Hey, if you want to try that, go start a church. God bless you, I'm just saying. It's funny when people do that. And this is what Jesus does. He's like, hey, Peter, I know what you got to do. You got to go out in the middle of the day and you got to go out into the deep. So again, Simon knew way more about fishing than Jesus. This is what he's done his whole life. And this went against everything probably in Peter's natural inclination and human wisdom to resist this. But nevertheless, we see that Peter actually listened to Jesus. In spite of his own personal experience, that you are never going to go into the deep in the middle of the day and catch anything. In spite of his own personal experiences, he trusts Jesus. He trusts Jesus and goes out into the deep. His experience would say, don't go there. Statistics would say you're not going to catch anything there. But he goes nonetheless into the deep waters and lets down his nets. Isn't that a beautiful picture? I think there's something for us in this, something, just a question that I would ask, something to ponder, something to invite the Spirit into. Are we allowing our experiences and our heart and our human wisdom to guide and direct our lives? Or are we allowing God's wisdom and God's word and God's heart to lead and direct us? This is challenging for us. The things that God may be calling us to, in our own minds, a lot of times they won't make sense. But am I going to rely on my own experiences and trust that I know what's better than God? Or am I going to say, God, this is crazy. How is any fruit or anything good going to come? This is crazy. But nevertheless, I'll do it. I'll go into the deep and I'll let down my nets. The willingness to follow God's word often goes against the grain of culture. It goes against the grain of our customs and our personal experiences and our common wisdom. But God's command for us is not a call to understand. God's commands for our life are a call and an invitation to obey. He doesn't say, hey, you got to understand how this is all going to happen. He just says, here's an opportunity. Will you obey me? Will you walk in obedience? Will you go into the deeper waters? Will you let down your nets in the middle of the day? And the problem for us is a lot of times we want full understanding of what the end goal is going to be rather than trust, rather than actually just going out into the deep and letting down the nets. And all through the scripture, you see the things that God calls people to, they sounded crazy. Like, this sounds crazy. If you think of God's promise to Abraham, Abraham's like 100 years old, and God's like, Abraham, you're gonna have a baby. And his wife's like super old too. And he's like, no, definitely not, right? That would be weird. I'm not sure if anyone here's like 100, but if God told you you're gonna have a baby, you'd probably think that's pretty crazy too, right? So Abraham's like, my wife's too old, there's no way that's gonna happen. So Abraham doesn't trust God. He hooks up with his maidservant Hagar. That's a big no-no. There's still massive dispute happening because of that in the nation of Israel. Another time, another sermon, another place. But then God still fulfills his promise. And through Sarah, she has the promised child, like crazy. It didn't make sense, but it happened. When God told Noah to build an ark, did you know that it had never rained on the earth at that point in time? God's like, hey, there's this stuff called water that's gonna fall from the sky, so build a giant boat. No one even knew what a boat was. Noah's probably thinking, what? He's like, yeah, the earth is gonna fill up with water. Can you imagine how crazy that sounds? It's a good thing Noah did it though. Otherwise, bye-bye human population, right? None of us would be here. When God told Moses, hey, I want you to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt, he said, I want you to lead them directly to the Red Sea. Now, this is crazy. If you know the Egyptian army is going to be chasing you, you don't want to go to a place where you're going to be pinned up against a river. Like, that's the last route that you'd want to take, but God wanted to do something greater. He wanted to perform a miracle, and he actually parted the Red Sea for the people to go through. So again, every story of the Bible, you can see this time and time again. What God calls his people to is not to understand. He calls his people to trust. He calls his people to obey. He calls his people into the deeper waters. And sometimes we miss out on what God has for us because we're waiting to try to understand how it's all gonna work out. We're trying to logically reason in our tiny human brains rather than just stepping out in faith, like Peter, and saying, I don't understand, but you, Jesus, have just told me to do this. You've called me into this. You've called me into the deeper waters. And so I don't know what that's going to look like, but I'm going to trust that you have something for me in that place. So again, what God calls us to, it doesn't always make sense. But when you step out in faith and you walk in obedience and step into the unknown, God always shows up time and time and time again. You will never have a time or a moment in your life where you actually stepped out in obedience and God just like leaves you out to dry. He will always fulfill his word. His word will never return void. And so Jesus here was taking Peter somewhere that he had never been, out into the deep, so that he could catch a catch that was greater than he'd ever caught. What was about to happen in this story that we're going to see in a moment is the greatest moment of Peter's fishing career. But he had to go somewhere that he'd never been to catch something that he'd never caught. And that only was possible by faith and obedience, stepping out as Jesus called him to go. And if you want to see Jesus work in deeper ways in your life, if you're here today and you're saying, I want more depth. I want more of God in my life. I want more of his presence. I want to hear more of his spirit. If you want to go deeper in your faith, if you want to go deeper with Christ, and you want to experience deeper measures of his promises, deeper comforts of his presence, you have to be willing to go into deeper waters. You can't just stay where you've always been. Peter had always fished the shoreline, but the catch that God had for him, the greater measure of abundance, was in the unknown. It was in the deeper waters. And the Christian path of discipleship, which is what we're all on, we're on a path called discipleship. Your journey of faith is not I raised my hand, I said yes to Jesus, now I'm good to go. No, it's a continual growing process. And the path of discipleship is a continual calling to tread out into deeper and deeper waters. It would be so sad if, having walked with Jesus 50 years, your level of spiritual maturity was the exact same as the moment you got saved. Wouldn't that be sad? But sadly, so many Christians just get so comfortable in their routine, so comfortable in the shallow waters where it's comfortable, that they never experience the deeper waters of God's grace. They never experience the deeper measures of trust and faith and obedience and stepping out into the things that God has for them. So many Christians remain stagnant in their faith and fail to grow in spiritual maturity year after year after year because they're unwilling to go out into deeper waters. I think this is one of the greatest problems in the church at large. I'm not just talking about our church, although it's a problem in every church, is spiritual maturity and growth. What does that look like? What does discipleship look like? Whereby I could look back on my life 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and go, wow, look how far God has brought me. Look at the lessons that he's taught me. Look at the grace that was provided. But a lot of people, you look back and you're like, I feel like I'm kind of just still in the same spot. I've still been going to church and kind of doing the routine and all that, but I'm not experiencing any growth. Why is that? Could it be that it's because you're not actually stepping out into the deeper waters? This last week, my son Bear, he's 4. He's been super into swimming this summer, and he's 4, and so I slapped the water wings on him, and he looks super cute in the water wings. And this whole summer he started learning like jumping into the pool. A few more years he's gonna be jumping those bridges with me. It's gonna be fire. He's jumping into the pool. He even did a front flip into the pool with his water wings. But I was like, yo, I think he's ready. Like I think he's ready to shed the water wings. So this week I took him off and we put him on the stairs, and I was like, all right, you're gonna figure this out. You're gonna swim across the whole pool by yourself. And just kidding. I stood out just a little bit and I was like, you got this. And he comes swimming out like 1 or 2 swims. Oh, sweet. And then I go a little bit further and he comes out a little further. And within like 30 minutes, like he got it down and he was swimming like 10, 15 feet with no water wings on. And then just yesterday's the first time he actually jumped into the deep end of the pool, and I was kind of standing there and I made him swim, but he did it. He made it into the deep end. And it was like, this is awesome. It was exciting to get to see this. This is growth. It'd be so sad if when Bear turns 18, he's still just like chilling in the shallow end with water wings, right? Like, I'm sorry, I would not be proud of him in that moment. I'd be like, bro, you got issues. We need to get you into some therapy up in here. You know what I'm saying? But the reality is the church at large, like as weird as that picture is, 18-year-old kid chilling in the shallow end with a binky and margarita, or what? No, you gotta be 21 to have a margarita. Sorry, can't, yeah, my bad. But the church at large, I want to give you that picture because I believe that the church at large is filled with Christians who have walked with Jesus year after year after year, but the reality is that they're just swimming in the shallow end with water wings. And it's actually really sad. We've actually been like, oh, whoa, this is great. We've kind of like celebrated. Yeah, you're still going to church on Sunday and still filling a seat and ready. Oh, that's good. And we've kind of settled with like the shallow end. We haven't challenged people, hey, God has more for you. Like the shallow end's great, day 1, maybe year 1, but eventually you got to come out further. And that's what Jesus is doing with Peter. And so I just believe that in our generation, in our church culture, there's so many people who should be like jumping in the deep end who are still just like comfortable in the shallow end. Now, I want to put a little bit more like traction to that. What do you actually mean, Zav? What does that actually mean, so many Christians chilling in the shallow end with the water wings? Here's what the shallow end is. And this is an okay starter spot, but if you stay here and that's all you have, I just believe God has so much more for you. The shallow end of Christianity, the starting point is maybe you come to church on Sunday, you sing a few songs, you sit in a chair, you listen to a teaching, which you're all doing right now. Right now you're in the shallow end. Congratulations, glad you guys are here. But then the rest of your week, apart from Sunday mornings, there is no intentional spiritual training. There is no intentional formation or discipleship in your life. There is no personal intimacy with the person of Jesus. And sadly, this describes, I would guess, a large percent of Christians who their whole life, that's what their faith is centered around. Yep, I am a Christian. Well, why? Well, I believe in Jesus and I go to church every Sunday and I sing some songs and I'm faithfully there and listen to the teaching and I'm good to go. That is the shallow end of the pool. Now, let me just say this. If you're new to church and new to Christianity, and you may not even be a Christian yet, or maybe you just recently came to Christ, there's nothing wrong with this. Like we are glad that you're here. We're glad you're here getting filled with the water of the word. We're glad that you're here and saying, I actually want to grow. I want to learn. I want to listen to the scriptures. I want to worship. This is all really, really good stuff. But the reality is this is just the starting point. Jesus has so much more for your life. Jesus is calling you into deeper waters. It would be so sad if you've walked with Jesus 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and that's all that your spiritual journey looked like. You're still just doing the same thing, sitting in the same chair, singing the same songs, going to the same church. Like, that's kind of nice, but God has so much more for you. I believe that God is calling our church specifically in this season into deeper waters. I believe that God wants our church to be challenged to get out of our comfort zone and to say, wow, what does it look like to intentionally grow in this season? How do I actually do that? What do the deeper waters actually look like? If the shallow waters is, yeah, I go to church and I sing some songs, what does the deeper waters actually looks like that Jesus might be calling us into? For starters, number one, the deeper waters looks like personal intimacy with the person of Jesus. In this moment, Peter's going out on the boat. It's Jesus who's there with him. He is now not just a part of the crowd that was on the shore. He is experiencing a personal relationship with Jesus. You can't have that just here on Sunday mornings. Like, if all you ever get is me feeding you and like me teaching the word, which I'm blessed and privileged to get to do, that is not personal intimacy. Personal intimacy is your prayer life, you talking to God, you pouring out your heart, you diving into the scriptures, you opening the word. One pastor said, it's amazing how many Christians base their life off of a book they've never read. Think about it. I don't want to have y'all raise hands because that might be embarrassing. How many of you have actually ever read the entire Bible? Most Christians haven't. And your whole life is based around this book that you're going to let me tell you about rather than looking into it for yourself. This is personal intimacy. This is the deeper waters. This is spiritual training where you no longer need somebody to feed you, but you're feeding yourself. So if you feel this, wow, like, God, you're calling me into this. I want to be the Peter. I want to go into the deeper waters. It starts with personal intimacy. This is the deeper waters. You cultivating a deeper personal relationship with the person of Jesus. And there's a lot of ways we do that, but I would say for starters, just start cultivating a prayer life. Just talking to Jesus. Just start reading the Bible on your own. Set a goal, just even one chapter a day. If you do that, one chapter a day, I promise you, you will get more out of that 20 minutes than you get out of your entire 2 hours here on a Sunday morning. God will do so much more in your life. So again, deeper waters looks like personal intimacy. Deeper waters also is not just being a consumer, but it's being a contributor. We intentionally don't say that this is a church service because service implies, hey, we're here to do something for you. We call this a gathering. This is our gathering. This is a 9 a.m. gathering. Because why? We're not here just to consume. That is the shallow waters. If that's the starting point, what you need, that's good. But hopefully you move from just a consumer where you just come and consume and sit and fill a seat to a contributor. You don't come just to be served, but you actually come to serve. Your point in coming to church isn't just for me. Well, what am I going to get out of this? What am I going to take away from this? That's great. That's a starting point. That's shallow waters. But the deeper waters is I'm coming to serve. I'm coming to give. I'm coming to contribute. What does it look like for me, a follower of Jesus, to actually invest in this community? What does it look like for me to actually be a part of what God's doing here, not just come every week and fill a seat? So again, the deeper waters is moving from consumerism to being a contributor. The deeper waters is not just simply taking and receiving, but it's actually giving out. It's saying, wow, God, what I'm receiving here on Sundays, what I'm receiving from personal intimacy with you, what I'm receiving in my life, I'm now going to give that out. I get to do what we're all called to do, to make disciples of all nations. I want to share what God's doing in my life with other people. That's deeper water. It's one thing for God to do something in your life. It's another thing to give that to somebody else, to share what God's given you, to be a contributor, to disciple, to evangelize, to proclaim the things that God is doing in your life. And the deeper water is also, it's not a place of where it's just me and Jesus. The deeper water is the place of community. It's communion with the body of Christ. And it's using our gifts to serve one another. This is deeper water, and a lot of Christians never get there. They're content with just coming on a Sunday morning, saying hi to a few people, but you never actually build real community. This is why in the spring we launched these story groups, because we really felt, God, you're wanting to take people deeper, and we want to create space for that. I want to just challenge you in that even. If you haven't joined one yet and you're feeling today like, wow, I do want to go deeper, that might be a good starting point. Commit to regularly being in community. They meet twice a month. That's not a huge commitment. I know we're all busy, but twice a month, that's not a huge commitment. You will grow radically. My group that I've been a part of, I've been so blessed. The relationships, the depth, getting to share our stories in life with each other, it's my favorite part of the month. It's amazing. God, that is deeper waters. Saying, God, I don't want just this. I want to actually build community. I want to actually grow in relationships. And so again, this is something that as I'm seeing in this passage and I was praying this week, God, what do you want me to share? I felt like this was what God was calling us to. Hi, Elle. There's my niece. She's coming into the deeper water, see? She's not staying in the baby class. The Spirit was convicting her, and now she's here. God bless you, Elle. It's amazing. So this is what I'm talking about. This is what the Lord's put on my heart. God, call our church into deeper waters. Someone once said, I don't know who said it, but you probably have heard it. They said, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. The definition of insanity is repeating the same thing over and over and over and expecting different results. But people do that in their Christian faith. People do this in their Christian faith. I hear people say all the time, I want to go deeper. If I asked any Christian here, do you want to go deeper? Every single one of you say, yeah, I want to do that. Yeah, I want to go deeper. But the question is, are you actually willing to make changes in your life that are necessary to begin to experience the deeper levels of the things that Christ has for you? We say, I want the results, but I don't like the journey out there. It would be nice to get the big catch into the deeper water, but sailing out there, I'm not too sure about that. And so we just keep doing the same thing we've always done. Well, I'll go to church, I'll sing some songs, I'll listen to teaching, and that's really good, but you're like, man, why am I not maturing and growing beyond this? It's because God has so much more for you than 2 hours every week on a Sunday morning. If this really is, if your relationship with Jesus really is the most important thing in your life, which as followers of Jesus, it should be. It should be our primary foundational relationship. We have to be willing to make the changes and the sacrifices necessary to go into the deeper waters of the things that Christ has for us. And I do believe that today, even right now, the Spirit is doing this in some of your hearts. I believe that even right now, you feel it, like you feel this weight of, wow, like I'm being called into the deeper waters. I've been the 40-year-old Christian sitting in the shallow one with the water wings, and I'm ready to go jump in. I'm ready to go deeper. I believe that Jesus wants to do more in your life today. I believe Jesus wants to do more in your marriage today. I believe Jesus wants to do more through your singleness today. I believe Jesus wants to do more through your vocation today. All of these things that we do and that we're a part of, and these relationships we have on a regular week-to-week basis, Jesus wants to be a part of those. These are means by which we can go deeper. But here's the thing. You can't just stay where you are and expect that you're going to continue to grow. You actually have to step out into the deeper waters of God's goodness. You actually have to have faith rather than understanding. You just say, God, I don't know what this is going to look like. I don't know what serving might look like, or being in community might look like, or giving or contributing or discipling or evangelizing, or I don't know what any of that might look like or how it's going to go, but I just want to do it. I just want to walk in obedience. And just know this, like if today you feel like this is what God's calling you into, confirmation of that would be that the deeper water is always a place of discomfort. Like if you're feeling uncomfortable a little bit, that's a good thing. It wasn't easy and comfortable for Peter to go out into the deeper waters. The deeper waters is the place of discomfort. It's the place of self-denial. It's the place of sacrifice. It's the place of surrender, and it's the place of trust. So I simply want to just ask you this question. Where might it be that Jesus is calling you to go deeper? To this week, just ask yourself that question and really pray through that. Jesus, where are you calling me to go deeper? Because if you want that, Jesus has something for you. And for each person here, it's going to look different. My deeper waters are going to look different than your deeper waters. Your deeper waters are going to look different than mine. But if all of us collectively say, I want to go there and step out into that, man, God has so many amazing things in store for us. Where is Jesus calling you into deeper waters? Now, let me show you something cool. If you choose to do this, if you choose to actually say, God, where do you want me to go deeper? Is it in my relationship? Is it in my finances? Is it with my time? Is it with my service? Where do you want me to go deeper? If you actually wait and listen and allow the Spirit to speak that over you, and then you actually step out in obedience, here's what happens. and I want you to see it in the text. Look at verse 6 and 7. Peter stepped out into the deeper waters, and in verse 6 it says, when they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. They signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both the boats so that they began to sink. So here's what happens. Jesus says, hey, Peter, we're going out into the deep, and I want you to let down your nets. And Peter's thinking, that's crazy. I can't do that. Nothing's out there. That's not going to work. But he does it nonetheless. And Peter obeys Jesus by going into the deeper waters. Peter serves Jesus by letting him use his boat. And now Jesus returns the favor. And now Jesus serves Peter. What we see is Peter gave Jesus an empty boat to use, and Jesus filled the boat with more fish than his boat could even contain. Here, Jesus, I got this empty boat. Do with it what you will. Jesus uses it. He preaches the gospel, and he goes, Peter, I got something for you. I'm going to fill your boat with more fish than it can contain. Not only was Peter's boat filled, but Peter had to call over the other disciples. He's like, you guys bring your boat over here as well, and their boat was filled as well. So what I want you to see here is that the blessing of going into the deeper waters, if you actually do that, if you actually go out in obedience to the things God is calling you into, the blessings of the deeper waters are not just for you. Do you see that here? God will always multiply your obedience, and it will overflow to bless even the people around you. Peter's obedience led to all the other disciples getting to get the biggest catch of their life as well. Had Peter, one person said, I want to stay in the shallow end, none of them would have got to experience this blessing. So the deeper waters, when you obey and step out, yes, God will fill your boat. God will do more in your life than you could ever ask, think, or imagine. But guess what? He's going to do that in other people's lives around you because you are walking in obedience to what the Spirit is calling you into. When we obey and step into a deeper place of personal intimacy, again, that's where deeper water starts. Guess what happens? When you step into personal intimacy, when you go deeper in your relationship with Jesus, guess what happens? You are filled, and guess what? You'll be filled so much that it will not be able to be contained. It will overflow and spew into the relationships around you. It was said of the disciples that the people realized that they had been with Jesus. There's something about them. Remember the story of Moses? He came down from the mountain. He was meeting with God. He had this glow about his face. It was the Mo glow. And all the other people experienced that blessing as well. When you go deeper in personal intimacy with Jesus, your life won't just be impacted. It will overflow into the lives of people around you. So you're saying, man, God, I want my friends to go deeper in their faith. I want my spouse to go deeper in their faith. I want my family. Then start with you. Because when you go deeper, it'll bring other people in as well. When you go deeper into the waters of community, not only will you grow, and trust me, you will grow, but guess what? The people around you will grow as well. Just as much as you will be blessed and filled by saying, wow, this is so amazing to get to be a part of a group of people who just encourages each other, challenges each other, prays for each other. You will be filled, but guess what? So will they. They'll be filled up. God will use you and your gifts and the way he's wired you to encourage and to challenge them. When you begin to serve and say, God, I want to go into the deep waters. I don't just want to be a consumer. I actually want to serve. Guess what happens? You will be filled. Jesus said it's better to give than to receive. So as you're giving out, that same moment you're going to be receiving. You're going to be filled, but also so will the people that you're giving out to, the people that you're serving. Whether you serve in kids ministry or on greeting team or worship team or on coffee team, anyone in here who serves, you know this. You leave filled. You're like, wow, how amazing that we get to serve people and love people. And guess what? Every person who you serve feels that same way. God multiplies it. We are filled, and God uses our ministry to fill others as well. When you step into the deeper waters and say, God, I want to give generously. I want to use the resources that you've given me for the work of the kingdom. It not only changes you by stripping you from the roots of greed and selfishness, but you will begin to see the fruit of your generosity being multiplied. You're saying, wow, how amazing I could support this ministry or Child Evangelism Fellowship or the story of these missions, that I can give just a portion of what God's given me to be used for the kingdom. And now, wow, So many people are growing and being discipled and hearing the gospel, and I'm a part of that now. I'm actually investing in kingdom work. You will grow and others will grow as well. So again, what we see here in this principle is that as Peter goes out into the deeper waters, it affected other people around him as well. And it's such a beautiful, that's how good God is, that he multiplies everything that we bring. That's what you see in the story of the feeding of the 5,000. They're like, we got to feed 5,000 people. What do we got? And he's like, well, we got a Hebrew Lunchables, a couple loaves of bread and fish. He's like, perfect. And they're like, this is crazy. You're not going to do that? He's like, yeah, multiplies it, fills everybody. You might underestimate what you have, but when you bring the small that you do, when you step out in the small acts of obedience, God multiplies it. God blesses it. Peter received so much more than he gave. He gave an empty boat and he received a full boat of fish, and all of his friends as well. This was the first all-you-can-eat sushi buffet for sure. Wish I could have been there. But what I want you to see here is Peter gave and served Jesus, letting him use his boat, not knowing that he would receive. Jesus wasn't like, if you let me do this and use your boat, I'm going to fill it up with fish. If he said that, Peter would have been like, for sure, I'm in. But how much more amazing is it that Peter didn't know there was a blessing on the other side of serving? He didn't know what God was going to do, but he just served to serve Jesus. I just want to be used by you. If you need my boat, you can use my boat. But Peter received far more than he gave. And I'm just here to tell you that when you do this, when you step out into the deeper waters and you obey and you serve and you give generously, we don't do it because of what we might get out of it. But when you do it, nonetheless, and say, God, I just want you to use what you've given me already. When you voyage into those deeper waters, Jesus will always fill you exceedingly and abundantly beyond what you could ever ask, think, or imagine. There is always a blessing that follows in the wake of obedience. There's always a blessing that follows in the wake of serving others. We don't serve and we don't obey for the blessing that comes, but that's just how good God is. That God, the Father's heart is, he wants to bless us. He wants to fill us, but how can he do that if we just remain in the shallow waters? We have to be willing to step out, and we have to be willing to walk in obedience. I personally have seen, a part of the reason that I shared, felt like I wanted to share this passage today is because I personally feel like this is, in the past 5 years, kind of been my story. I have been so honored and so privileged and so blessed to week after week to get to serve you guys. To say, God, what are the gifts that you've given me and how can I use those for other people? And for almost 5 years now, getting to week after week, teach the word and invest my life into this church has been such an amazing opportunity. And I can remember, even when I was in Bible college, 18 years old, and my mentor Wesley was saying, Zav, like, I believe God is calling you to teach the word. And I was kind of like running from that. And I started feeling like called to church plant. I was like, whoa, this is crazy. And I didn't know when it was going to happen or how it was going to happen. But I remember just saying, God, like, if this is what you're calling me to, like this deep water of one day going out and planting a church, I want to do that. I want to just walk in obedience. I want to use my gifts to serve you. And so God 5 years ago called me out into deeper waters. I was working at a church in Eugene. It was awesome. I felt comfortable, safe. I was like, this is just a great spot. I can just ride this out forever. But God's like, no, it's time to go. It's time to go and be sent and go out into the deeper waters. And I stepped out and planted this church with a small team of people, and it was so amazing. And what I've seen is exactly this story. Like just looking back at the last 5 years, and I could look back at my whole life, but in the last 5 years, I've seen exactly this. God just being faithful to fill my life. God being faithful to fill this boat. Like, here we are. Another Sunday morning, and like God continuing to bring people in to fill you, that God's presence might fill you, that I might be used to fill you, that you might be used to go out and make disciples and fill other people. I've seen God doing this time and time again, and it's so amazing. It's such a beautiful thing. And I'm just so grateful to get to be a part of this small work that God's doing here in Ashland. It is a privilege to get to serve in this way. But what I want you to see in the text here is, as this happened, again, the disciple, Peter threw his nets over, and there was way too many fish for him to even catch. He had to call the other disciples over, and it says that their nets were beginning to break, and the boat was even sinking. Now, this is a serious problem if you're a fisherman. If you're out there and you got too many fish in the net and into the boat that it begins sinking, that's a problem, but it's a really good problem, right? Like that's like the dream problem to have is like, well, we got too many fish, the boat is sinking. It's a problem, but it's a good problem. And this is, I would say, even part of our problem of where we're at as a church. I would say this is part of a good problem that we're experiencing, that as God just continues to bring more people and is faithful to fill the boat, I believe that we've been at a place for a while even where we just need more people to take ownership. We need more people to say, hey, I don't want to stay in the shallow end just consuming. I actually want to give. I actually want to contribute. I actually want to serve. I actually want to invest, because the reality is one fisherman can't do all the work. Peter couldn't bring in all the fish. I can't do all the work. My staff can't do all the work. The leadership team and eldership, even we can't do it all. Like, it's amazing how many people we get to minister to week after week, but we can't do it all. And at times it kind of feels like, oh, the nets are breaking. We need more story group leaders. We need more people to disciple people. We need more people helping in the kids. We need more people on all the teams. Like, we just need more people. And we have the people, right? Like, we have plenty of people here, but I think it's that, again, a lot of us have just kind of stayed in the shallow end. We're comfortable to kind of sit on the sidelines and watch rather than getting in the game and saying, whoa, like that God actually wants to use me here to serve and to bless other people is maybe a new concept for some of you. And so again, I want to just challenge you guys and challenge our church today. If you feel God's calling you into deeper waters, we would love that. We would love for you to come alongside and serve and support and contribute to the work that God is doing here. The reality is we need more people to tend to the fish. We need more people to invest in the fish, to care for the fish, to feed the fish, to disciple the fish, to create community for the fish, to nourish the fish, all these things. This is what the fisherman does, and this is what God's called us to do, being fishers of men, and we need more people to just hop in the boat and say, hey, I can help carry this load as well. I can help right here. I can serve right here. Here's a small gifting I have. I don't know how God can use it, but I'm going to walk in obedience. I'm going to step out into the deeper waters and just say, God, use this as you will. Tim Keller said this, and I think it's really insightful. He says, the larger the church grows, the more the basic pastoral ministry, such as discipling and oversight of Christian growth and counseling, is done by lay leaders rather than the professional ministers. The larger church must continually struggle to improve pastoral care and discipleship. The pastor of a medium-sized church will have to spend much more time recruiting and supervising volunteers that he once would have done in the church when it was smaller. So this is, I just kind of am sensing this is like where our church is kind of at, that we've just seen like, wow, God's doing a really cool thing, but the reality is like we're over capacity. There's so many fish in the boat, but not enough people who are investing in it and serving in it. And the reality is that this is a normal problem that every church experiences. Like, as you kind of continue to grow, the larger a church grows, the harder it becomes to find people to serve, actually. And the reason for that is really interesting. This is in Tim Keller's research. He said this is primarily because the more people that are in a church, the less any individual person feels any sense of responsibility or ownership, because you assume, whoa, there's so many people here, somebody else must be doing that. We assume, whoa, look how many people here. Of course there's going to be someone in the kids. Of course there's going to be someone on worship team. Of course there's going to be someone running production. Of course there's going to be someone making coffee. The larger a church gets, we just assume, well, somebody else must be doing that. And we are so grateful and so thankful for the people who are serving, the people who are investing, who are making it possible for the ministry to run and to operate week after week. We're so grateful for the people who are leading story groups and discipling people and investing in people. But I just believe, again, that God has so much more for our church. I believe that God has more that he wants to do, and God wants all of us to just say, God, what does it look like for me to go into the deeper waters? What does it look like for me to invest? What does it look like for me to serve? What does it look like for me to disciple people? What does it look like for me to be in community? What does it look like for me to have a deeper time of personal intimacy? All of these things, I believe, are things that God is calling our church into. And again, our job as pastors and leaders and staff and elders of this church, our job, Ephesians says, is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. So my job is not to actually do a bunch of ministry. My job is to, and I'm privileged to do it, it's to equip you guys to do the work of the ministry. It's to equip the saints to do that. And I think we've had a false model of church. We think, well, these are the professional ministers, and so they do it all, and then I just do my thing. But the biblical model is we're called to equip and train all of our people to invest in the work of the ministry, to serve, whether that be at Child Evangelism Fellowship, to be equipped and trained to go out and make disciples at Bellevue. Like, what a radical opportunity. Like, these are things and opportunities right here in our backyard, and I love that. Jesus said, go and make disciples of all the nations. You don't have to go be a missionary overseas. If you're called to that, it's amazing, but we have so many opportunities to serve and disciple people right here in our backyard, and even right here in this very church. And so I just believe that God is at a season where he is wanting to increase our capacity, but I just want to let you know up front, like, we can't do that alone. We're already seeing, especially in kids, especially after the Vacation Bible School, I think we had like 120 kids at VBS. Like, Rousseau tells me every week, we got to get some more people in there. Like, kids is exploding, which is so cool. It's a great problem to have. The nets are breaking, but we need more people to step up. And so just an encouragement and a challenge and an exhortation and something to pray through. Would God have you just invest at a deeper level? Would God have you even once a month just serving on a team, serving on a greeting team, serving in the kids? Would God have you once a month just being a part of what he's doing? Maybe twice a month, maybe, I don't know, but just to really intentionally pray through that, because I just believe in this season, God's calling our church into deeper waters. I close with this. Here's how the story closes, which is such a beautiful conclusion. In verse 8, it says this. It says, and when Peter saw it, he saw all these fish, this amazing miracle Jesus did. When Peter saw it, he fell down at his knees, saying, depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching men. And when they had brought their boats to the land, they left everything and followed him. So this is just a beautiful way that the story closes. In the chaos of a sinking ship full of all these fish, more fish that the boat can even contain, this problem becomes secondary because Peter realizes that he's standing in the presence of Jesus. The problem and the miracle, wow, look at all these fish. He realizes, oh my gosh, Jesus just did this. This is miraculous. And in awe, he falls down on his knees in the boat and says to Jesus, I'm a sinful man. He realizes how magnificent, how amazing, how good, how glorious Jesus is. In the boat full of the greatest catch of his life, it's actually not about the fish. It's about Jesus. He doesn't say, whoa, look at all these fish. This is awesome. He says, wow, this is Jesus who did this. He marvels at the presence of Jesus for the miracle that Jesus has done. It's not about the miracle, but the miracle is about the one who made it happen. And that's what brought Peter to his knees. Not that he saw some miraculous thing, but that he's like, Jesus actually did that. That is incredible. That is miraculous. That is amazing. And we can't, and we have to be on guard, especially as a young church coming into our 5th year. We have to be on guard about having our eyes being misdirected at all the great things God is doing. It can be so easy to say, whoa, look at all the people, look at all the ministries, look at the social media following, look what's happening online, look at the lights, look at the music, look at all this stuff. It can be so easy to do that and miss the point of it all. And miss that, wow, Jesus is here. Jesus is doing this. Look what Jesus is doing in our midst. And so every week we need to make sure, and I want to just challenge you to check your heart. We need to make sure that the focus of everything that we do, is it pointing us to Jesus? Is it directing our hearts towards Jesus? Why are you here? That's a really important question to ask. Is it because your heart is being drawn towards Jesus? Is it because you want to go deeper with Jesus? These are things that we have to keep at the center and forefront of our minds. Every single week, we should be in awe and humbled of what Jesus is doing. Wow, Jesus, look at what you're doing. Look around. Look what I get to be a part of. Look how I get to serve. How can I support Jesus? How can I add to and support what you're already doing? Just getting on board with what you're doing here. This is the focus. And this miraculous catch of fish that we see Peter just caught, this was actually a foreshadowing of the ministry that Jesus was calling him to and the innumerable amount of souls that would be saved through Peter's ministry. You see this? Jesus multiplies it again. Jesus disciples Peter, invests in Peter, serves Peter, fills his boat. And then we see that Jesus says, hey, Peter, you're not going to be fishing anymore. I'm calling you out to go and be a fisher of men. I'm calling you now to go out and do exactly what I did for you. I just came and gave you an invitation and an opportunity and loved on you. And now I'm calling you to do the exact same thing. The priority of Peter's life was no longer fishing. It was going and serving Jesus. And his boat was still a part of that. But he said, my whole heart and my intention is to go and to follow Jesus. And I just believe in this season, this is what Jesus is calling us to. This is what Jesus, I feel, is calling our church into. To say, what does it look like Peter to say, hey, I'll leave the nets behind. I'll leave the boat behind. I'll leave the great catch of fish. I don't even need that. I just want to follow Jesus. My prayer and my hope and my heart in this season is that as a church that we would evaluate our lives and say, Jesus, what does it look like for me to be a fisher of men? What are you calling me to sacrifice? What are you calling me to leave behind in order to come out into the deeper waters of following you and just being used in the way that you created me with the gifts that you've given me to be used by you to spread and expand your kingdom? And so the question I want to close with is simply this. Is there anything in your life that Jesus might be calling you to leave behind in your pursuit of coming out into the deep waters? Maybe there's some nets that you feel you're tangled up into, and Jesus is saying, hey, you got to let that go. You got to cut that off. Maybe it's your success. Whoa, look at all these fish. Look at how amazing my life. Man, can I leave that and follow Jesus? Or can I use this for the kingdom? Is there a way to use the things God's already doing in my life? But what is Jesus calling you to leave behind that you might follow him more closely? Again, what are those deeper waters that Jesus is calling you to go out into? And then my question is simply this: will you go? Will you go? Will you walk in obedience? And so again, my challenge and my prayer for this week is even this week, just really pray about this and read this passage and reflect on it and say, Jesus, what does this look like for me? What are the deeper waters for me? I don't want to stay in the shallow end. I don't want to be 30, 40, 50 years down the road, still just chilling with my water wings. I want to go into the deep end where we walk in obedience to the things Jesus has for us. Amen.